Hello and welcome to this Alabama adventure. Tonight we talk about the monster fish of Lake Martin. Now, Lake Martin is located in Tallapoosa County, and let me give you a few little quick facts on the lake so you'll kind of have an idea of what we're going to be talking about. Lake Martin is located on the Tallapoosa River, 40 miles north of Montgomery. It's in the general area of Alexander City and Dadeville, and this area is known as the Lake Martin area. Construction began on the lake in July of 1923 and was completed January the 1st, 1927. So that means it's a very old lake, and a lot could be going on there in that length of time. The elevation of the lake is 490 feet above sea level. It covers 40,000 acres over 65 square miles. It has 700 miles of shoreline. And the maximum depth of this lake is 155 feet. So with that size and that depth, a lot could be going on, as I said. Several years ago, as a matter of fact, I had a man to tell me shortly before his death that he actually worked at a government facility that was located under the lake. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I don't have any way to investigate that and find that out. But I took the man serious at what he was saying, and I believe him. Anyway, over my life, I have lived here almost all my life in this area and pretty close to Lake Martin. And I have heard numerous stories of these monster catfish. And when I say monster fish, I'm not talking about a 40 or a 50-pound fish that might take you an hour or so to pull out of the water. I'm talking about fish that have been told to me that are the size of automobiles. And I know that's hard to believe, but I'm going to tell you 4 stories that I can remember right off the top of my head about these monster catfish that live down near the dam, is what I have been told. All the stories that I have got on these monster fish have been in the area of the dam. So anyway, let's get started with the first story. Now then, the first story of the monster catfish of Lake Martin comes from a gentleman that I knew many years up until his death. As a matter of fact, he had 4 daughters that were about my age, and we all went to high school together. One of them was in the same room I was in through school. But the other 3, at one time or another, we had a class together. But it was just some very well-respected people of the community here. And I'm going to call him Mr. Daly. That's not his real name, but that's what I'm going to call him. He served on the council here at Wadley for many years. And he was a very truthful person. He was as I said, he was very well-respected in the community. But what happened when I heard him telling a story of the monster catfish, I walked into a store that sold fishing tackle, and that's what I was there to buy that day, was some fishing tackle. And while I was over at the counter looking at what I wanted and picking out what I needed, I heard him and some other men laughing and talking over a little ways from where I were. And after a while, they sort of began arguing in a friendly way, but I really wasn't paying attention to what all was being said until I went up to the counter to pay for some line and tackle that I was going to purchase. Anyway, Mr. Daly was telling everybody that the previous weekend he and a friend had been to Lake Martin to do some fishing, and they were fishing pretty close to the dam. And he said they were in like a small boat with just an outboard motor. I believe he said it was a 12-foot aluminum flat-bottom boat. And they had been fishing for a little while, and he said all at once this big fish surfaces pretty close to the boat. He said within 8 to 10 to maybe 12 feet from the side of the boat. And he said that this fish's head was as large as a LTD car hood. Now this would have been in the early 70s, so if you remember those old LTDs back then, they had a hood on them that looked about 5 or 6 feet wide at least. But he said that this thing head was what surfaced, but you could see the body of the fish moving under the water behind its head where his tail was moving, I guess to keep him floating or whatever. And he said that the entire fish would have been longer than the boat that they were in. Anyway, some of the other people were kind of laughing and making fun out of him and wanted to know what they were drinking down there that day. And he told them very quick that he was not drinking that particular day, that he had seen this giant catfish. He said it could have easily, as large as it was, could have easily capsized their boat. And he went on to say that day that that was the last time that he would go fishing on Lake Martin in a boat. He might fish from the bank, but he would never get on Lake Martin in a boat again. And as far as I know, up until his death, he never fished back on Lake Martin in a boat again. Now then, the second fish tail above these giant catfish came just a few days later. At the time, I worked at a sewing factory here in Wadley, and me and a gentleman named Lewis spread cloth together. He was on one side of the table and I was on the other. The tables were about 50 to 60 feet long, and we continuously walked back and forth spreading cloth so the patterns could be put on it and the shirts could be cut out of that. But anyway, that next day or so, after I had heard Mr. Daly telling of the giant catfish, I mentioned it to Lewis, and I already knew that he and the head mechanic at the sewing factory fished on Lake Martin every Saturday. That was just their weekly little getaway from everything. They would leave out like early Saturday morning and get back Saturday afternoon, and usually have a boatload of fish and clean fish and give fish away and all that type of stuff. But anyway, I asked him, had he ever heard or had he ever seen these giant catfish that were in Lake Martin? He was mostly a bass fisherman, him and the bass and crappie. Now they're called crappie, but at that particular time in the 70s, the fish were called crappie. But anyway, he and the head mechanic, that's what they mostly fish for, not for catfish. But he said he had heard stories from other fishermen in that area of these giant catfish, and he said it was always near the dam where they were always spotted. And he said, but the head mechanic there, who was a Mr. Preston, I'll call him, said that he had actually seen two of these catfish from the dam. He and some of his friends were on the dam a while back and just happened to look down in the water, and two of these giant catfish surfaced and swam around a little bit. So in a little while, we walked over to where Mr. Preston worked, and that was what Lewis told him. He said, I want you to tell Jim about those giant catfish. That he was talking about somebody else had seen the giant catfish down there, so I want you to tell him what you had seen. So he did, and what he said is him and some friends were on the dam. It had been a year or so earlier, and said they just happened to look down, and at the time, at the exact spot that they were looking, these two giant catfish surfaced, floated there a while, swam around, and then went back underwater. And he said, looking down on them, he said the fish were larger than his pickup truck would have been. He said if you could have caught one and put it in the bed of his truck, that if you put its head, say, up next to the cab and its body went down the bed of the truck, he said a lot of it would hang out the tailgate. He said you couldn't have got the whole fish in the back end of his truck. And what he drove at the time was a 1967 long wheelbase pickup truck. So that will kind of give you an idea of how large that this fish was. He also went on to say that after seeing these fish, that there was no way that he would have got in the water. Him and Lewis, let me add this, and you may know where it is if you're familiar with Lake Martin. Him and Lewis fished a place called Dead Timbers. That was where they fished every Saturday, and where they had tremendous luck catching fish. They caught a lot of crappie, a lot of bass, just all the time on Saturday afternoon, maybe around 3 or 4 o'clock. You could go down to Lewis's house where they came back to, and they would be having a large fish cleaning, and I've got in on that a time or two. A time or two I didn't particularly want to, but anyway, we always used to help each other out whenever we'd have something like that. And of course, I brought home a lot of fish to put in the freezer. and sometimes we had a pretty nice fish prize and that type of stuff. But anyway, Mr. Preston and Lewis fished there for many more years to come, until they were both just physically unable to launch boats and go fishing anymore. And but he always told me that as long as he would fish, or he had fished on Lake Martin after seeing these two giant catfish near the dam, that was one place that he would not get in a boat on Lake Martin. He did add that if you were down near the dam and your boat capsized for whatever the reason, that these fish could easily eat you. And he said that he never went on the lake near the dam in a boat. Now then, the next fish tale comes from also a reliable source, an Alabama state trooper. Let me give you a little bit of background on him. This particular state trooper was not only a state trooper, he was on the diver team, the Alabama State Trooper diver squad, or team, whatever it was called. I can't remember the exact name, but anyway, whenever something happened within the lake or underwater, the state trooper divers were sometimes called in. Anyway, to give him a little bit more credibility, he was also featured in Life magazine at one time. This particular state trooper was featured in Life magazine. Anyway, what happened, there had been a boating accident down near the dam, and of course the rescue squad and the sheriff's department had been called in to assist in the recovery and rescue. But it turned out that I believe it was 3 people drowned in this boating accident. 2 of the bodies had been found, and 1 had not. No trace at all of this 3rd body had been found. So that's why the state troopers, divers, were called in, and this particular man was one of them. And he and another diver entered the water at Lake Martin near the dam, and of course the reason being is that's where the accident happened. But keep in mind that that's where these giant catfish are, and this is where they entered the water. So anyway, he told me that he and this other diver had been swimming around, and they had got to the bottom, and they were searching for this body. And he swam up on what he thought was a large container or a large tank of some type. He didn't know exactly what it was whenever he swam up on it and found it. But it was at the bottom of the dam. Whatever this thing was, of course, there wasn't a whole lot of light down there that deep in the water, but there was enough light that he could sort of tell that it was a large object of some type. And he swam up to it, and it was very dark colored, and he placed his hand on the side of it, as you can see in this picture that I have drawn to sort of help illustrate what he was telling me. And he said that this was very close to what he saw down there that day. Anyway, he put his hand on it, and he began to swim alongside this container or tank or whatever it was. The first thing that went through his mind was maybe it was a large gas tank or something like that that had been left there whenever the dam was built, because it was very slick and slimy feeling as he ran his hand alongside of it, as he swam alongside of it. And he said on 2 different occasions he actually took his hand off of it and cleaned his hand from this slime and whatever you might call it was on the outside of this object that he had found. And thinking that it was some type of debris left when the dam was built, he thought, well, if it's a large container or tank, then one end of it may be open, and the body that they were looking for could very well have washed up into the end of it. So he kept swimming alongside of it, searching for the end of this thing to see if the end of the object that he had found was open. Okay, now he swims alongside a little ways, and he comes up to this knob, this some type of protrusion, a large round protrusion in this tank. And it goes through his mind, well, this is some type of water tank or gas tank or something like that, because this could be a cover over the spout to where you would fill it. And he got closer to it to where he could see it better. He actually ran his hand over it at one time, and when he did, he said he thought he felt this thing move a little bit, and he kind of backed off, and he gets his face down closer to this knob or something that he's found, and he sees that it's an eyeball, and this sort of upsets him more, especially being underwater, and he's run up on a large eyeball that he estimated to be 6 to 8 inches. Now, it could have been a little smaller than that, because you know, whenever adrenaline begins to flow and you're underwater and you're searching for a dead body anyway. But he, well, like I said, was a state trooper, and he was trained to tell exactly what he saw, and I believe the man when he said it was 6 to 8 inches. But he said he got down closer to it, and he actually saw this eyeball move a little bit, and he backed off from it. He said he backed off very slowly from this thing, because then it went through his mind that this was a giant catfish, that the stories he had heard over the years were true. And as he backed up, then you can kind of see in this picture here that I have illustrated, he could tell that it was a giant catfish. Now, he had swam alongside of it, and he was almost at the end of it, and he was at the fish's head. Of course, that's where the eye is. But he said as soon as he identified this thing as a catfish, he began to back off, and he said he could actually see alongside this thing the whiskers that a catfish has. And he said next to this catfish's head, where the whiskers attached to it, that the whisker would have been as big around as his leg. And this particular state trooper, I'm going to say, was about 6'2" or 6'3". So he was a pretty good sized man. That means that the whiskers were pretty good size too. He also said that when he saw the whiskers, they went right up to the mouth of this thing. And he said that this catfish that he had swum up on ran his hand down the side of it and touched its eye, all in just a matter of a few seconds. Mouth would have been large enough for him to get inside. He said this catfish could have swallowed him whole. And it is very possible that that's what happened to this particular body that they never found. And there have been several other boating accidents and drownings on Lake Martin where the body's never been found. And unfortunately, I guess it's a bad thing to say, but this could be where some of the bodies have turned up, is inside the catfish. This particular state trooper was a very large man. He was not the kind of man to be afraid of a lot of things, but he immediately, as quick as he could, he said he didn't make any quick moves around this catfish, but he said as quick as he could, he got out of Lake Martin and said he would never dive into any part of Lake Martin ever again. And through the rest of his career until he retired, he dove in other places, but he never dove in Lake Martin again. And one final fish tale of Lake Martin's monster catfish. I'm going to call the gentleman Hank Crawford. Hank Crawford has lived in Alexander City, Alabama all his life. For almost 60 years, he has fished every inch of the lake at one time or another. If you need to know where and when to catch fish, he can tell you. Hank has seen these fish on more than one occasion, and they've always been in the vicinity of the dam. He has seen them from boats as well as from the dam. His description of the giant catfish match all the others. Hank says these fish may be the reason for several drowning victims never being found. As the size of the fish, they could easily swallow a whole human being without leaving a trace. Hank also says he could capture one of these monster fish, but he would have to have the right equipment. Knowing him as I do, I believe he could do it. Equipment is costly, but I would like for him to have the chance to capture one. Then once and for all, that would prove the existence of Lake Martin's giant catfish. And with all that being said, as I always do, I'd like to say hello to my granddaughter Madison. I would like to tell you that the Alabama Bigfoot Society is run completely out of pocket. And with all that being said, I guess we'll be looking for you next time on the next Alabama Adventure.